Okay, this is the middle of the night, but the wind has died down. So I'm going to try and make this video and try to be very succinct about it. I keep telling people to get diagnosed, and the reason I do that is not because I want you to be able to join the club. Well, first of all, it's because I think it's gross if you believe you have something and you live your life as if you have something and you really don't, and you're robbing yourself of life. But also because once you get a diagnosis, it's sort of like a starting point, and from there you can try to figure out how to live in this world in a way that's easier for you, and you stop smashing against brick walls, and instead you either avoid them completely or go around them. So I wanted to talk about the difference between when I got a diagnosis and after. Now, I only got my diagnosis maybe 10 years ago, and I did quite a few things before my diagnosis. Like, I have 2 college degrees, and I couldn't take high school, so instead of dropping out, I was an exchange student, because again, there's two different approaches to the avoidant personality disorder, and one of them is that you basically are a homebody and you can't stand being around new people and you have to be with your family, and it's almost like a form of agoraphobia, but not quite. I mean, they're radically different, and that was really sort of callous of me to say that, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I've heard of people with avoidant personality disorder being misdiagnosed first with having agoraphobia, and the other one is people who just go away. I'm definitely the latter one, where because I know I'm being judged, but for some reason it doesn't bother me if it's somebody that I'm never, oh, this is my new girl, I'm never going to have to see again. So they can judge me, but I'm not going to see judgment, and for some reason that's alright. Anyway, so I mean, I kept doing all these things. Also had my son before I got my diagnosis, because but the thing was that before I had my diagnosis, I basically believed my family's stories about me, which was that I was weird, that I was wrong, that there was that it was all about me, and I was just weird, and I was broken, and I was not right, and it was my fault. My family is remarkably extroverted. I mean, I have one cousin who, I swear to God, I am not kidding you. I swear to God, I am not kidding you. Has to be the center of attention to such a degree that if he's in a funeral, and people aren't paying attention to him because, of course, he's at a funeral, he will literally burst out in the loudest singing you could imagine, and will insist that he is inspired to honor the dead. Swear to God. That's the way my family is, my entire family. And, my mother and father, they both came from really big families. My mother's one of 5, my father's one of 6. They're used to having people around, they're used to having lots of yelling and shouting, and they're used to having people on top of each other. So that I would rather be alone in a closed room when there are people around. They just think that is just the weirdest, strangest thing they could ever imagine. They can't even... It's outside the realm of, human behavior. I am just an absolute broken anomaly and wrong to them. And that is what I thought. I was told I was a snob. On and on and on. And of course, if anything went wrong or bad in my family, they always somehow scapegoated me, that it was my fault. They, it was like, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, that they would figure a way of blaming me for everything that possibly happened. And yet anything that was a positive thing, my mother somehow found a way to take credit for it. And that's the way I grew up. I kept flirting sort of with depression diagnoses, trying to get help. The first time I went in, truly went in, I was 15, but it was my mother trying to threaten me into complying with her wishes. I was an embarrassment to her, so she sent me in and threatened me with, putting me in a mental institution until I, knuckled under. And I was like, okay, that's what I do. Like I said, I was an exchange student in high school. Guess what I was getting away from? Anyway, when I was 18, I started therapy on my own. I thought, because, you have to have stupid jobs if you go to college, and I just couldn't be around people, and I thought, oh, I have a problem with men. No, I have a problem with people. And so I went to therapy to try to work on that, and my therapist said, you have an issue with your mother. And so this is what my therapist said. She said, well, do family therapy. My mother thought this was the greatest thing. I swear to God, this is what she did. She would keep a list every week of every single thing she thought I did wrong. Every single thing I thought she said. And then she would come into my therapy that I was paying for and read the list for an entire hour of everything that I did wrong. And finally, my therapist was like, this isn't really helpful because, your daughter is never saying a word. And my mother's like, yeah, well, she needs to not do all these things. And then, and so the therapist was like, okay, here's what I'm going to have you do. You don't come into the therapy session. You call me on the phone and read me the list. Obviously, the therapy didn't work. And again, that was depression. This is, again, when I started to feel like I was totally broken as a person because the antidepressants didn't work. The next time it really hit me was I had postpartum depression. I thought I had, they thought I had postpartum psychosis. Found out, in fact, I was just absolutely exhausted because I had an infant and was working full time and was completely by myself and trying to keep this kid, you got to feed a baby every 2 hours and go to work full time. I was exhausted and was, seeing things because I was so tired. That didn't work, so they let that go. And then it was when my son was 7. He was acting weird because he's autistic, and autistic kids sort of act weird every once in a while. I never thought anything of it, but my neighbors did. And they thought it obviously, if kids acting a little different, then it must be the parents' fault. And I'm a single mother, and I keep to myself. So they assumed that I was abusing him and put in a call to DHS. That was great. Talk about stress. He got his autistic diagnosis. I got my avoidant personality disorder diagnosis, and the claim was canceled. And actually, I think it was really, in retrospect, a good thing because we both got the diagnoses. But anyway, so that's like what it was like before. I was alone. The only time that I would sort of interact with anybody was when I was so utterly desperate and alone. And it would usually happen about every 5 years. That, when I was so desperate, then it would override the avoidant personality disorder, and I'd sort of let somebody in for a little while, and then would go. But I thought it was my fault, like I said. When I got the diagnosis, immediately I felt sort of a sense of relief because it wasn't just my fault. I wasn't uniquely weird. And I also had like something I could focus on, that I could learn about, and that's why I was really big in the forums, and that I could really, go to town and figuring out what this was, and just learning as much as I could, because then I could, again, alter my life in a way that took the avoidance into account, so I wasn't smashing against the walls and trying to force myself to be something that I'm not capable of being. So it was like a really like honeymoon period for maybe 4 or 6 months, something like that. But now I can tell you, getting a diagnosis is not the be all end all, makes life beautiful. On the contrary, when I was before I was diagnosed, I would try to make friends, and I would try to have people, and I sort of had that as like a bona fide ideal and goal. And now I know it's not possible. I know it. Before, I just thought, I'm broken, eventually I'll figure it out, and I'll be able to find the right people. There's got to be somebody, there's always somebody to be a friend for somebody. And now I know that's not true, and that there isn't anything I can do about it. And I basically put myself into this massive catch-22. I think it is kind of unique. And again, I think that it's the scapegoating that I grew up with, where I'm responsible for everything and everybody. But now, I mean, people pick up on it. People pick up on the avoidant personality disorder, even if they don't know. Like, my oldest friend, when I finally came out and said, this is what I've got, was like, yeah, right, what else? You know, so what? It was a great relief to hear that. But on the other hand, it's like obvious. Anybody that knows me knows all these things. When you, and this is the point, when you get a diagnosis, it's just a description of what you already are. It's not news to anybody when you have this diagnosis. Anybody who knows you is like, oh yeah, that really does describe you completely, to a T, perfectly. And all the time. And even if you think you're getting over on people, they know. And that's the thing. Now I feel completely responsible for sort of, this is hard to explain. I mean, go back to Cantor, who I hate, obviously. The thing, I mean, there's always something that somebody gets really bugged by and irritated with Cantor. The thing that irritated me the most about Cantor was telling me that the biggest problem with avoidant personality disorder is that we are victimizing all the people who would have been able to get to know us if we weren't avoidant. And I'm like, what the hell? Okay, that is 180 degrees from reality. Because reality is, I always suck for people. Maybe in the beginning a little bit, they can be like, oh yeah, interesting person, blah, 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 lots of stories. I do lots of stories. But then the stories run out, and then there's just me, and I suck. I'm not good for people. I make them feel bad across the board. It's like in the Peanuts, the pig pen, the kid that had that, dust. Well, maybe no. I'm thinking of Charlie Brown. Charlie Brown had the cloud with the rain cloud over his head over the... That's what I mean. There's like something that's this like force field that infects people. And so, the people who actually want to get to know me, there's something wrong with them because they can't pick up on this like thing that I exude. So they're untrustworthy on the first point. And if you've got somebody that's so decent that they're going to look past that, they need to be protected from me. And so I feel very strongly that I have to push them away, and that I'm responsible for pushing people away to protect them from me. And that is the biggest difference. Before, I sort of just did it. Now it's like a very conscious effort I've got to save people. And that's worse than before I had my diagnosis, I've got to admit.